Good evening, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're doing very well today. Playing some more Golgari for you. I think I'm finally ready to make a couple of tweaks to this list. It's not going to be anything major. I've had one or two people asking about whether I'm going to try a Dark Confidant build out for the channel. Not quite yet. That's what I came from. I used to play for Dark Confidant and Abzan before I made the switch over to Green-Black and Tireless Tracker and a higher land count and Tassiger and all that good stuff. So I'm not moving away from the shell as a whole, but I do have a couple tweaks I think I'm finally ready to make. I just gotta finalize a couple choices, but look for that video shortly. But until then, we're playing the same list we've been playing for quite some time, and the hand is sweet. Triple Swamp, that's a tad awkward, even though they're these beautiful Onslaught art swamps. That could potentially be slightly awkward. It doesn't even really protect us against Blood Moon without a green source, but hey, the hand functions. We also don't really have a threat besides Hissing Quagmire. But we are on the play. Turn 1 Inquisition on the play is something you can almost never pass up in a blind game 1 with a functional hand, and this is one of our best pieces of interaction in the opener as well. So let's keep it. Opponent will keep 7 as well. Let's see, what are you up to, my friend? What are you up to? You are up to nothing good. It's a Tron deck. Boo, Tron. However, it is Eldrazi Tron, so not as much of a Reddit and Twitch meme to hate Eldrazi Tron as it is to hate regular Tron. So is this fair Tron? Is that what we're supposed to call it? It's a fair Tron deck? I don't really know, but anything Tron is a little bit of an uphill battle for us. Assassin's Trophy has made all of these Tron variant matchups way, way, way better, but it is far from a free win card. It is still kind of an uphill battle. I don't think it's unwinnable or anything like that, but certainly something that we're not favored in, if you ask me. So our opponent's hand, however, is not all that scary yet. They are still 1 land away from casting their Reality Smasher, and they are 3 lands away from casting the Wormcoil Engine. Unless, of course, they assemble Tron, then all bets are off, but they're pretty far away from doing that as well. So they have a Spatial Contortion, which right now we don't care much about. There could be a world in which we're firing up Hissing Quagmire turn 4, I guess, but trading a land for a spell is fine with me in this matchup. So I'm pretty happy to take the Matter Reshaper. Not only is this kind of the most sensible take in a vacuum, but this is just one of those 2-for-1 cards once it hits the board that we just don't like to deal with in a matchup where we are trying to 1-for-1 them with as much efficiency as possible. So pretty happy to take away a Reshaper there, and we'll pass it to the opponent. I was just kidding about the boo, by the way. I actually kind of like Eldrazi Tron. As far as Tron variants go, anyway, it's a cool one. E-Temple and pass. Alright. Another land is certainly not what we want to see. We definitely need some more action. We'd like a nice big fat threat that can't be killed by a Spatial Contortion. They're going to find another Eldrazi Temple. That's a little scary. That means we are facing down a Smasher next turn. I take back what I said. I'm going to boo this deck again. Double Temple is just insane. They also found a Chalice of the Void off the top. Chalice on 1. I don't think Chalice is generally very good against us. When it is good, it's usually when it's set on 2. That said, even on 2, Abrupt Decay and Maelstrom Pulse, Liliana of the Veil Ultimate, I guess, that we have a bunch of outs to it. When you play along the curve as traditionally as we do, Chalice can't usually get you too bad. That said, certainly the correct play to just run it out there on 1. It's still a fine play. Field of Ruin. Lands are bad, but Field of Ruin at least is a pretty good one here. We are just not going to mess around. We're going to main phase it. You know, we could have draw stepped this, actually. I'm not sure how many wastes they're likely to play. But we could have saved this for the draw step, but regardless, before they move to the main phase, we certainly want to take them off of an Eldrazi Temple. So here, we didn't have anything better to do with our turn anyway. We have bought at least a turn before we get hit by the Reality Smasher. So, opponent will deploy an Urza's Power Plant, and they will pass. They have one unknown in hand, because this wastes on field. Yeah, that came from their deck. So yeah, one unknown. Assassin's Trophy, fine draw, but it's one that is not the most proactive. That said, certainly one of the better cards as far as answers go in this matchup, without question. Alright. So they made their 4th land drop, and because they've cheated on mana with the Temple, they get to throw down the big old Reality Smasher. Now, Assassin's Trophy is a nice answer to this, and partially just compared to the previous suite, the pre-trophy suite of answers. If we were stuck with like decays and pushes and even Maelstrom Pulse, none of that can answer it right away. It's going to get us for 5, and then it's going to make us discard something. That's still kind of bad in the same way with Trophy. We'd still have to discard. We'd still be giving them a land. Now, generally answering Tron threats with Trophy is just fine. We're happy to give them a land just to have an answer that actually hits their stuff. But the problem here is if they have another Wastes in their deck, that's going to put them on Wormcoil Engine mana. So what do we do here? Well, you know, I often say that this is a mediocre man land, but sometimes Death Touch gets irrelevant. Death Touch is irrelevant more than even I thought it would be the more I play with this deck. And I even gave it, I think it's fair due in the deck text, but man, Death Touch is relevant in Modern. It really is, especially in the context of our deck. So here we are so happy to trade this away. Yes, they get to trample over it for 3. That is not something that we care about. We've had a totally painless progression so far, so sure, we take 3. Just as if we were a normal deck that had Defection Shock, you know? And this is so much better. We're flooded on lands, so we get to trade away a land for one of their biggest threats, and we didn't have to discard and ramp them, which we would have had to do with the trophy. Man, that feels good. We still get to hold our trophies in hand, too. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to downgrade these cards. They're incredible in the matchup, but that was just about the perfect answer to a Reality Smasher, honestly, so good job, Hissing Quagmire, and you know, we're continuing to flood, we're continuing to draw lands, but hey, after that, I'm not too mad to see another Quagmire, that is for sure. Opponent forgot about their Chalice. Now, as stylish as these counters or emblems are, you know, I think if this said 1 instead of just showed a gem, people would be less likely to get blown out by chalices and by other things that are set on 1 that are, it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing, you know? It's easy for this to just become decorative to the mind's eye, whereas if it said 1, maybe they wouldn't have done that. That said, hey, sure, we'll get that Basilisk Collar out of your hand, don't mind if we do. We are continuing to draw nothing that's proactive, so we're going to fire up the Quagmire and send it in. Now, they do have a Spatial Contortion. Yep, there it is. So we knew about that, that's totally fine. We're just kind of interested in using our mana this turn. And the reason... Yeah, we'll play our Fetch Land out and pass. The reason we didn't want to just hold that up and pass is because, like, from now on, we need to hold up Assassin's Trophy, because, like, if they play a Wormcoil Engine this turn, we're still totally fine because it doesn't have haste. From here on out, we've got to hold up 2 mana basically at all times, because they could always go land into Wormcoil. So we're unlikely to be able to fire this up again, and, you know, even though it's a good blocker against a lot of their big threats, we now have such a wealth of answers that we can afford to lean on those a little bit more. We also, of course, want to be able to tap out for a threat. Not tap out, but tap 2 mana for a threat if we have one off the top, which is going to put us shields down as far as activating this goes. Anyway, let's see what the opponent has. They found a Walking Ballista for 2. Sure. It's a little annoying, but it's obviously not the end of the world. Man, we're flooded. We're flooded with no tracker. Feels pretty bad. Feels pretty bad. We don't want... So we cannot really afford, in my opinion, to just pass and let this thing grow. As annoying as it is to spend an Abrupt Decay, which would have been nice to hold for this Chalice, or even for another Chalice on 2, we can still answer that. Yeah, you know, we don't want to give them a mana sink. That's just not how we're going to win this game. We're happy to hold these swamps in hand for now, but man, we'd really like to draw something else. Something proactive, some kind of a threat. And what do you have for me now, opponent? You have another Walking Ballista for 2. Yeah, this one's going to be even more annoying because we're going to have to trophy it, and they can either shoot us for 2 in response, or they can go get a land and finally hit land 6 for Wormcoil. Okay. Fatal Push. Fatal Push is a thing. But we are going to have to trophy the Chalice in order to do so. And you know what? At this point, I'm pretty happy to. Again, I don't feel I can afford to just let this Ballista sit on the board, get another counter, smack us for 3, and then we are no better off in terms of answering it. Like, it will still be able to take off its counters in response to removal. So, our draws have been a little bit lame. We are kind of safe here because they do not have a third Wastes in the deck. That is very good to know, and it also shows that we should definitely have waited to draw step, activate our Field of Ruin. So I just kind of assumed they played more than 2 Wastes. They could have the second one in hand. I guess they have one unknown. But yeah, definitely very, very pleased, pleasantly surprised to not have gotten, not have ramped them there with that Assassin's Trophy. And our opponent, I think, maybe just F6'd, or otherwise forgot to take off the 2 counters and Walking Ballista in response to the Fatal Push. We'll see if it matters. They find a Relic of Progenitus, okay. Not really affecting us much at the moment, so sure, they'll just clear it out. And now they've hit land number 6. Alright. So there is an argument here for Assassins trophying an Eldrazi Temple, because we know they don't have any other Wastes to find. That's going to put them back down to 5, and it's going to obviously make them less efficient, at least in terms of casting the actual Eldrazi. Now, the problem with that is we still don't have a clock, we still don't have a threat, they're at 20. I think we're just supposed to hang on to these and try to answer their threats with them. Like, we just have to keep playing draw go and try to find a threat. Alright, there is a threat. Liliana will threaten to ultimate, so she qualifies as a threat. She's going to get a card out of their hand right now, which is probably pretty good. And, of course, she's got now 2 edicts available if we can keep her around. So we've got to discard the swamp. This is one reason we held on to lands like this. They're going to discard an Ugin. Yeah, that's just fine with me. That card usually just ends the game against us when it comes down, so sure, fair enough. Alright, here comes the Wormcoil Engine, as we knew. So they've got 1 unknown in hand. They're going to pass. So end step, we're just going to Assassin's Trophy this thing. Now, there is an argument for actually not doing so, right? Because we could untap, we could draw whatever, and we'll see, and then we get to pass and trophy the thing on their turn, which is actually going to kind of buy us a turn in a weird way, because then their tokens come back and the tokens are summoning sick. The only problem with that is that incentivizes us to tick Liliana up. And if we draw anything good next turn, ticking Liliana up is terrible, right? We don't want to pitch a trophy, and we don't want to pitch anything else good we draw. So, while that is a respectable line, I think here we are able to potentially grind through the tokens with the help of Lily, and we're also not punishing ourselves for a good draw. Now, this is exactly what I mean. Tarmogoyf is a good draw. So we'll go ahead and trophy away the Death Touch. And then we could just Edict the Lifelinker. But I think the better play here, because our Tarmogoyf comfortably outsizes this thing, is to tick Lily up. We're increasing her loyalty, we're working toward ult, and we're going to get some gas out of their hand. Okay, it's only an expedition map, but I'm still pretty happy about that. That still feels like some fine value to me. So our opponent, yeah, they find an Urza's Tower. Alright, so if they had kept that map, they would have Tron right now. Again, they're out of gas, but still pretty nice. We'll cash in, or rather tick down the Liliana. It's not cashing in, I guess, if she's still around. So we're going to tick the Lily down. We could have played defense, you know, we could have sat behind the Goyf, ticked Lily up again, played the Blooming Marsh, but at this point, I want to be proactive. I've got him on a 4-turn clock with the Tarmogoyf. I think that's enough incentive to start swinging out. Opponent's got a Chalice for 2. Sure. Alright, we find a Tassiger off the top. That's pretty nice. Pretty nice. So here we just get to deploy our whole hand, run out the Blooming Marsh, and then here I realize, well, I might potentially delve away some of Tarmogoyf's power here, so the thing to do is just swing in the main phase first, make sure we get in for our 5 damage. Then we're going to delve with the Tassiger. Now, we've got 5 land untapped, we can leave one thing in here. It's kind of tempting to just take the swamp away and leave both trophies, but that's actually going to shrink the Tarmogoyf. So we delve away one trophy, we keep the other, and the trophies are not as high value as they would normally be as a Tassiger target, of course, because they have a Chalice on too. So we'll go to the next turn, tick the Lily up. Okay, maybe the replay function is a little forgetful here. Pretty sure I ticked her up there, but even if I forgot, we're in a really commanding position, and yeah, the game's just over. So I think the replay missed that one, but regardless, yeah, opponent takes a look at the top card for their draw step, and then they just scoop. They did not quite face lethal that turn, but yeah, with Lily around, you know, with 9 power on board, it's pretty deterministic. We've got a nice mana sync with the Tassiger as well. I don't think they're going to get much. Ugin might have been their best out, but Ugin is probably just a one of in their deck, and he would have to minus pretty far to kill the Tassiger, or to exile it rather, although it could be done. Regardless, that was kind of a strange game, right? Like, we definitely flooded pretty hard. We also, in the course of flooding, drew a bunch of really good answers in the form of Assassin's Trophy, one of the best cards against any Tron variant. That said, we would still have been in a pretty bad position if we had not been able to answer the Reality Smasher with a Hissing Quagmire block. That was a key moment in the match. We were able to trade a land for their best creature. Like, that is completely insane if you really step back and think about it, especially compared to the alternatives we had in our hand at the time. So it took us a little while to get going. Our opponent, you know, they never assembled Tron. They didn't have a high threat density either, but we did win through some good stuff. We were able to take away their early 2-for-1 with a discard spell. Then we won through a Smasher, a couple Walking Ballistas, a couple Chalice of the Voids, and a Wormcoil Engine. So finding the Liliana, she was our threat that we needed. She ended up disrupting them pretty well, taking them off Allah's Dust, which they did eventually find the mana to cast, contributing to keeping the board clear with an Edict, and then of course we found a couple fatties at the end to sew the game up. So that's kind of how it's done against Eldrazi Tron. It's a deck that Trophy makes this matchup a lot better. Before, we were leaning too heavily on Fatal Push and Abrupt Decay and cards like that as removal, and while they do have targets, none of them are necessarily great targets most of the time. So Trophy shores up matchups like this where they tend to go a little bit over the top of you as far as, you know, converted mana cost and big bombs go. Trophy is awesome. So let's go to the sideboard and see how we're going to set up against the Eldrazi Tron deck. Alright, folks, time to sideboard against the Spaghetti Monsters, and right away I like Fulminator Mage. I like Fulminator against all of the Tron variants. Before Trophy, this card came in against basically any blue-based control and any Tron. Now he's more of a maybe against the control decks, or kind of specific matchup dependent. But he's still a for sure inclusion against any Tron variant, in my opinion. Now, Eldrazi Tron does not live and die based on whether they can assemble Tron or not, by no means, but even hitting Eldrazi Temple is totally fine. I think this card for sure comes in here. I do not like any of these artifacts. Engineered Explosives, of course, their CMCs are too high for this to matter much. It is an out to Chalices. It's nice against multiple Chalices, but Chalice is a card that we can beat. I don't think it's very good against us. Now, yes, occasionally they will blindly throw a Chalice down at the CMC that completely hoses your hand. I understand that that happens. Overall, the card is not particularly something we need to worry about. So, if for some reason you think it might be, then yeah, Explosives is worth considering. Otherwise, nope. It doesn't really hit much else they're doing. They don't use the graveyard, really, so Spellbomb is certainly something we're not interested in. Maelstrom Pulse is a for sure. I'm telling you, this might be the most sideboarded in card of my entire 15. This card is great in the main. It is great to have access to a second copy in the side. We for sure want this catch-all removal against all of their big Haymaker permanents. Golgari Charm, not so much. Of course, it doesn't sweep anything up because they're all too large. Regen is not very live, and Destroy Target Enchantment is not very relevant, so that card's a no. This is a grindy matchup. We want to meet their big bombs with our big bombs. I like Nissa here. I do. I definitely do. Even though they're not a deck that kind of proactively removes our permanents, her -3 is actually pretty useful, because there's a lot of ways that our permanents end up in the graveyard anyway, whether it be stuff like discarding something to be able to kill a Reality Smasher with a kill spell, things like this, just taking blocks, you know, early, like Scavenging Oozes dying to Spatial Contortion, things like that. So her -3 is relevant. Her +1's also quite relevant because they don't tend to have a great deal of chump blockers, and the land can also trade with just about anything, at least any of the 5 mana or less Eldrazi it can trade with, or just outsize and win the trade. No to Obstinate Baloth. This is not a matchup where they're playing Lilianas of the Veil or other hand disruption. And, you know, if this was like a 5/4 or something, it would be a lot more appealing, right? Because then again, like Nissa's land, it could trade with just about everything that's a 4 of in their deck. But not quite good enough here as far as the body goes. The life gain's not that relevant either. Usually, when Eldrazi Tron beats you, they beat you pretty comprehensively. They're not racing you by the skin of their teeth or anything like that. So, choke against a colorless deck, not where we want to be. Kalidas, also outclassed and outsized as far as the pure power and toughness stats go. Yeah, you know, it's cute to be able to do away with the Matter Reshaper trigger, for instance, with Kalidas down if you kill the Reshaper, but yeah, I think this card is just too slow and not big enough. Sorry, guy, you're awesome, but not the matchup for you. Surgical Extraction, I would bring in against regular Tron. I'm not going to bring it in against Eldrazi Tron. And it's just because keeping them off Tron is less important. And they also, like, it's more of a mid-range matchup in terms of how you approach it. We have to, we can't go down on resources to attack a win condition, really, because they have so many and they can just play stuff on curve and beat us. So, and they're more naturally designed to do that anyway than a regular Tron deck. So I say no to Extraction in this matchup. Obviously no to Duress, in my opinion. They've got just too many creatures we want to hit with this card. Collective Brutality, one of the worst cards in the main deck, so we certainly will not be bringing the third one in from the side. It just doesn't kill enough, the drain is not relevant enough, and the discard mode is even narrower than Duress. Duress at least can take away their expedition maps, their planeswalkers, you name it. Brutality is way, way, way too narrow in this matchup. One of the few where I really don't like it. It's an all-star in the deck, it's versatile, but not against Eldrazi Tron. And just to take a moment to talk about Eldrazi Tron in general, I think the deck has fallen off, right? You don't see it anywhere near as much as you need to. I think that's because it's a little clunky, it's a lot inconsistent, and there's a lot of wasted power, right? You end up assembling Tron and using it to cast a Matter Reshaper or even just a Thought-Knot Seer. Not necessarily the types of payoffs you want that are always available. Now, the deck is still strong, I'm not hating it at all, but I think there are two reasons that it rose to prominence. Number one, had a really good match against Grixis Death Shadow when that was king of the format. And number two, against decks like ours, it just is so resilient against cards like Brutality and Push and Decay that it gets a lot of, its stuff just kind of naturally dodges or blunts, I should say, some of the removal in the format. That's pretty common. That's Brutality is the best example of it, so we don't want that. Do we want Damnation and Languish? This is a matchup where I think we want the Damnation over the Languish. Now, Languish is still fine, but it has a big, glaring omission of not being able to hit Reality Smasher. Having to take 5 from Smasher and only then being able to Damnation it is bad enough. When your Languish doesn't even kill it, I don't think that's acceptable in this matchup. They also could play things like, Endbringer or Worldbreaker, I believe. Worldbreaker is more of a traditional Tron card, less of an Eldrazi Tron card, but Endbringer is a common one of Tron, and I believe both of those creatures comfortably outsize a Languish. So here's how I'm siding. I don't even really have any maybe board cards here. I just have 4 cards I like and 11 that I don't. So what comes out? So I think Collective Brutality we can go down to and be quite happy with that. So discard is fine. Discard is fine against them, but again, we're treating this more like a mid-range matchup, right? Where we want threats and answers more than hand disruption. We don't want bad top decks. We cannot afford bad top decks. So I'm going to try to take out some discard. Let's see if I have anything else I like less. Tasigur is great here. Liliana the Veil's fantastic. Last Hope is pretty poor, actually. She might stay, but she might go. She's cuttable, in my opinion. Tracker's fine. All the stuff, these 5 cards are fantastic. Decay is a little bit worse, but I'm fine leaving it in to hit Chalices and so forth, and maybe maps if we're on the play. Things like that are totally fine. Goyf is fantastic. Scooz is actually pretty poor as well. They're going to be playing some relics, and Scooz is just a little bit average anyway. They don't use their graveyard in any meaningful way. So you could trim a Scooz here. Fatal Push is a pretty medium card, but with trophies around, we can realistically beat Wormcoil engines a lot more than we used to be able to, right? And Fatal Push is actually somewhat necessary in some situations for grinding through their tokens. And it can kill a Thought-Knot Seer with a Revolt trigger. It can kill Reshaper, which is not ideal, but it can happen. So I will pretty happily trim 1, but I think leaving in 3. I think at most you would trim 2. I think you want to retain access to some Fatal Push. And again, we want to kind of trim away discard, and I think clearly Thoughtseize is better than Inquisition here. So again, we could trim like up to 2. Retaining access to 4 is good. So what don't we like here? Let's do this, and we got to bring 2 cards back in, right? So this is our 56. Sorry, we got to bring 4 cards back in. I misspoke. Yeah, we got to bring 4 cards back in. So what do we want to get rid of the most? Well, we brought in kind of 1.5 threats, so I'm actually pretty happy cutting a threat here. I'm going to leave a Scooz to the side. This is debatable, but I'm going to leave 1 to the side. Leave another Planeswalker in. And then we've got to bring 3 of these 4 cards back in. What do we like more? Well, let's do 1 of each. and then you can bring one of any of these 3 cards back. Let's say that. I think that's pretty reasonable here. If I had to pick one right now, I'm going to say let's just roll the full 4 Fatal Push. But you could say maybe Inquisition's a little bit better. I don't know. So from there, it's down to taste. Maybe play draw matters as well. Maybe Inquisition's a little bit better on the play because it can take away Expedition Map and things like that. And maybe Fatal Push is a little bit better on the draw because we have, they're likely to get ahead of us on the curve, and we might have to play a little bit more reactively. Or you could just say we'll take out one of each and play our full complement of Scavenging Ooze, even though it's pretty medium in the matchup. That's all pretty viable. Not going to make a huge difference in the outcome of the match either way. So these 4 for sure. Brutality's out for sure, and then from there we have a few kind of gray areas in terms of what's best to come out, in my opinion. That said, conservative sideboarding is certainly the way to go here. All of the sideboard cards we neglected to bring in are questionable at best, so when in doubt, stick with the main deck stuff. Tarmogoyfs, Trackers, Lilies, Maelstrom Pulses, Trophies. This stuff is all just fine. Thoughtseize is just fine. So let's roll this back and see how it goes for us post-side on the draw. Alright, my friends, Game 2 on the draw against Eldrazi Tron, and our hand is pretty sweet. Turn 1 Thoughtseize is pretty wonderful against them. We've certainly got the late game value ready to roll. Our hand is pretty slow, though, for being on the draw. That said, I definitely don't think it's a mulligan. It's a very functional hand, a nice balance of lands to spells. Liliana of the Veil is one of the most valuable cards in the matchup. These threats are both really nice too. This is a for sure keep in my view. Opponent will keep 7 as well. Ghost Quarter. Alright, pretty happy to not see a Temple or a Tron land right out of the gates. That said, turn 1 Relic is pretty bad for us trying to get a Tasigur down. A second Liliana doesn't make us any quicker, but it certainly is another powerful card. Here we have to do something that happens, I'm not exaggerating, like 1 in 50 or maybe even 1 in 100 games, which is Fetch, Shock, Thoughtseize. This is a 5 mana cost that we're paying to interact on turn 1 efficiently. Now you could argue maybe we just fetch a swamp and then we only have 1 green mana, and that's fine. That's viable too, but I certainly like to have access to double green. We do have Nissa in the deck, plus Scavenging Ooze. So this is unusually painful for our deck, keep that in mind. We almost never have to fetch and shock, much less fetch, shock, Thoughtseize, but we did here, kind of the penalty for our clunky utility lands, but we see Eldrazi Temple, Wastes, Chalice of the Void, Expedition Map, All is Dust. Alright, so what do we care about? Chalice of the Void is best against us on 2. We don't actually have any 2-drops in hand. There is no way they're going to be able to get this on 3 before we get a ton of our 3-drops down. That is not a concern. We can still play Tasigur through any Chalice, obviously. So Chalice is not something I care about. All is Dust is a very powerful card, but they are nowhere near assembling Tron. They don't have a single Tron land in hand. Eldrazi Temple, for those who don't know, actually ramps them toward this spell as well, because it is a tribal card with the subtype Eldrazi, and this adds 2 mana for colorless Eldrazi spells, of which this is 1. So they still need to hit 6 lands to do this, or, 5 lands if one of them is another Eldrazi Temple. This is a game-winning card. That said, we are pretty clearly on the Liliana plan right now. We probably would be anyway, but normally we don't want to play the tracker out on 3 anyway. We don't want to expose this card to removal before we get value out of it. So Lily on 3, we're all in on that play. Taking her up is likely going to result in this card leaving their hand because they're too far away from casting it. They're going to need to keep more immediate action. So, Expedition Map is our take here. Feels a little strange sometimes to take their 1-drop with a Thoughtseize when they have, you know, such powerful alternatives in hand. But I think that is the correct take here. They'll play an Eldrazi Temple. They're going to annoy us with this relic, sure. And so I think this is intelligent play from our opponent. It would have been mana efficient to just slam the Chalice on one, but if we cared about the Chalice, especially a Chalice on one, we would have taken it with Thoughtseize. So recognizing that, they're going to hang on to it. Maybe they're holding up removal, maybe not. Maybe they're just waiting to play this on two. We will have to see. Blooming Marsh is a good draw, because this is going to let us play the Lily on turn 3 and then have a guaranteed 4th land in hand for the Tireless Tracker. Of course, we're just flush with both colors of mana now as well. So they're going to play a Waste, and they found a Thought-Knot Seer. Alright, that's a very good one. And now we are very, very pleased that we drew this duplicate copy of Liliana. Because if we still only had one, they would take her, and then we are just kind of like... We're a little stuck, right? Playing the Tracker on 3 is never great. We can't play the Tassiger because they've been relicking us. That would have been very bad, but they don't have a way to not get edicted, next turn by the Lily. So instead they're just going to exile our Tireless Tracker, which, again, I think is the correct play by our opponent. That said, while a Swamp is not the most exciting draw in the world, it is pretty exciting to edict away a Thought-Knot Seer. That always feels so good. And we draw Maelstrom Pulse, which is just an MVP card in the matchup. Urza's Mine into another 4-drop. Walking Ballista for 2. Alright. And they're just going to ping away this Liliana. Sure. And then exile her. Fair enough. So we still know they're 2 in hand. It is All Is Dust, Chalice of the Void. Ooh, Nissa Vital Force. Now this is a heck of a threat. This is kind of changing everything, right? Because we were initially on the Lily into Tracker plan. Tracker has been cruelly taken away from us. How could you? My favorite card just about in the deck, and you took her away. But we now have a new plan to run away with the game, and that plan is called Nissa Vital Force. Now here, we have 2 options, right? And they're both pretty decent options. We can play the Liliana, we can tick her up, and we can get one of those cards out of their hand. Or we can play the Liliana and tick her down. Now that's not very clean, right? It's a pretty poor edict, actually, because they get to activate Ballista in response and just trade the Ballista entirely for the Liliana. But you know, I need this 5th land in hand to play the Nissa. I obviously don't want to tick up and remove the Nissa. I obviously don't want to tick up and lose my 5th land. Field of Ruin also just great on its own, just as a value play. I obviously don't want to tick up Lily and lose the Maelstrom Pulse, so maybe we're supposed to just tick up and lose the Tassiger, but I'm pretty close to hardcasting this guy, and he's great. So, as much as we were all in on the Liliana plan, now my plans have changed, and I'm just going to trade a Liliana for a 1/1 Walking Ballista. It doesn't seem very good, but of course if we let it untap, it would get even bigger. And in the context of what I just explained, I think that's the right play. I'm not too worried still about either of these cards in hand. I still don't care about Chalice of the Void. I still don't have anything on 2, which is where they'd cast it. I even have an answer to Chalice if I need to. And they're still quite far away from All Is Dust. So they're going to play a 4-drop for the 3rd turn in a row, and this time it is going to be the Chalice on 2. Sure. You got it. Graveyard still empty. And we draw Tarmogoyf, so we are promptly punished for the timing of the Chalice, but that is just fine, because we were not going to do anything besides slam the Nissa Vital Force this turn. So, throw her down, take her up, make a Swamp into a 5/5, and get in. Alright, opponent. They're casting an Eldrazi spell here. And it's a Reality Smasher. Alright. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're 1 mana away from All Is Dust now, so that's a little scary. And they've got the Smasher. Now, one reason Nissa is so great is because she comes in with 5 loyalty. She ticks up to go to 6. So the Smasher, as strong as it is, cannot cleanly answer her, although it will send her down to 1. Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize is a beautiful draw here. So we had planned for a while to pretty much inevitably get this out of their hand one way or another with a Liliana tick-up. We never ended up being able to tick up a Liliana. Thoughtseize is a fantastic draw. We're just going to get this All Is Dust gone so it is not kind of like an Executioner's Axe hanging over our heads any longer. So, here, the play in my opinion is this. We're going to Maelstrom Pulse the Reality Smasher. We really need to deal with this threat, and we still plan to not care about the Chalice. We're not going to spend removal on it right now. At least it's not in our immediate future. We just want to ride this Liliana to victory. That's our plan. Be really, really proactive. So the way to do that is to kill the Smasher, pitch away the Tarmogoyf because it cannot resolve through a Chalice of the Void anyway, and then, sure enough, we get to animate a Swamp, send it in. We've got a 4-turn clock just like we did last game, only this time instead of a Tarmogoyf, it is a Swamp. Kind of a strange life, but that's the life of a BGX player, right? So they're going to cash in their Relic for a new draw. After finding a land off the top, they find another Relic with their Relic. They cash that one in too. That's why the card is good, because you can always trade it in for a fresh draw. That said, we're definitely fine to have forced them to spend a second Relic without any value. So here, let's Thoughtseize you, see what's up. We can't really afford not to, because they are a Tron deck. There are so many powerful cards they could have that they just didn't have the mana to cast last turn. Anything from Reality Smasher to Endbringer to Karn to Ugin, even to another All Is Dust. They could have anything like that. Instead, they just have an Eldrazi Temple. Sure. So, Thoughtseize is a little bit wasted, but we get to untap here. Now, they've got a couple Ghost Quarters, so now that they are not tapped out anymore, our Nissa is no longer able to freely clock them for 5. Now, getting this Ghost Quarters is not the end of the world, and I actually misplayed here, right? So I wasn't really paying attention to the Ghost Quarters, and when I went to attack, or before attacks, I saw the Ghost Quarter and was like, oh, hey, I can't attack. I'm going to get GQ'd. Might as well cast my Tasigur. I should have attacked, forced them to spend a Ghost Quarter, and then in the second main, I would still, I would be able to find a basic, and of course, then I could get the Tasigur down comfortably. So this was a misplay for me. I should have forced them to blow a GQ instead of just main phasing my Tasigur. That said, they're going to blow a GQ on the Hissing Quagmire anyway, sure. So we'll pass. They're going to play that Eldrazi Temple we knew about and pass. Ooh, now this is an interesting draw, Fulminator Mage. So I actually like this draw. So if we wanted to play around the Ghost Quarter, we are not able to Field of Ruin the Ghost Quarter profitably, because we'll activate Field, they'll activate GQ in response, and then our Field will fizzle, so we will not get to search for a basic land. I believe that is how that works. Fulminator Mage, on the other hand, like this card is just putting them down a land anyway. So here we get to just kind of do this on our own terms. We don't put ourselves down a land, in other words. They're going to GQ our Field in response, sure. We'll float them on in response just because it's good practice. Go get a basic. Now here, if we wanted to, we could get really cute. We could untap that land, use it to use our floating mana to activate Tasigur, buy back potentially the Fulminator Mage. That's not what we want to do. We want to just be proactive and kill them before they have a bomb off the top, in my opinion. So we'll hit them down to 1. Again, smart play from them to GQ our Hissing Quagmire last turn, because they would be facing lethal from 3 different sources in the upcoming turn, had they not. That said, they're still in some trouble. They show us that they have another Eldrazi Temple to indicate how flooded I guess they were, and they will scoop it up. So Nissa Vital Force going just about all the way on her own. If they didn't have an answer in hand, it would have been literally all the way on her own, because, you know, the forests, or the swamp, the lands would have done 20 damage just on their own. So Nissa Vital Force with a helping hand from Tasigur, closing out the game in an extremely rapid fashion. Not that turn 9 kill is rapid, but once the clock starts going, it's extremely rapid. And you know, Fulminator Mage was a nice little piece of value there. The Thoughtseizes were so clutch. Thoughtseize the Expedition map turn 1 ended up being pretty nice, keeping them off of All Is Dust long enough for us to draw another Thoughtseize and take it away. Liliana the Veils were fantastic. The first one, edicting the Thought Knot Seer, was incredible. The second one ended up being kind of a very subpar trade-off with a 1/1 Walking Ballista, but that paved the way for our Nissa to come down and us to pivot to that game plan. We played around the Chalice pretty well. We got some value out of our thing that we were locked out of by pitching it to a Maelstrom Pulse, pitching it to a Reality Smasher activation, rather, that we killed with the Maelstrom Pulse. Yeah, nice little example of some BGX value here. So we did not lean on the new tech in Game 2. We didn't lean on Assassin's Trophy. We just kind of got there with the good old-fashioned grindy cards. And I guess MVP there goes to Thoughtseize and Nissa Vital Force. So good games, well played to the opponent. Eldrazi Tron can be a beating, but our setup has the tools to take them down with some consistency. Now, I want to say that in general, E-Tron decks are on the slightly to moderately favored side against mid-range decks. I think we might be something of an exception to that. I think we might be pulling into 50-50 territory or so. I would need to play this matchup a lot more extensively than I have, now that Trophy's out especially, to really get some more precise ideas for that. But hey, Trophy was a huge boon. Our 25 land high curve build ends up lining up a lot better against Eldrazi Tron than a Dark Confidant build would. And you know, my specific sideboard choices, like with access to a second Maelstrom Pulse, man, it feels good in matchups like this. So yeah, good stuff. And as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you have any alternative suggestions as far as how I sideboarded, you know, maybe we do want the Languish, or you have some other opinions, something like that, feel free to send them my way. But until then, I hope you have a great day, and I will see you for the next video.